My voice trembles, but I keep myself together, as if the words are fragile threads about to snap. I'm standing in the darkness of my small kitchen, and the silence around me is so thick it feels like it's pressing on my chest. My mom slapped me across the face in front of the whole family. My brother clapped like he was watching a show. My dad smirked and said, "Serves you right." That night I made 3 phone calls and their world collapsed. I paused to take a breath. My fingers gripped the edge of the counter, cold as the November air outside the window. But it all started long before that, long before I could understand. I'm Helen, 42 years old. I live in Chicago, in an old apartment building that smells of damp walls and my neighbor's stew. I work as an accountant at a small company, crunching numbers to make other people's lives add up. My own life, though, has long been like a shattered mosaic. My voice probably sounds tired, slightly hoarse, like someone who's been silent for far too long. I'm not the kind of person who likes talking about herself, but today I have to, because this story isn't just about my pain. It's about how I learned to hold it in my hands and not let it break me. How do you describe a family who's supposed to be your support, but instead becomes a stone around your neck? My mom, Tamara Johnson, always had perfect hair, as if she were ready for a magazine shoot even at home. Her voice was sharp, like the clinking of crystal glasses she only took out for guests. My dad, Victor Johnson, a retired engineer, was quiet, with a heavy gaze that always said more than his words. And my younger brother, Adam, 5 years younger, the eternal golden child. He failed one business after another, but to my parents, he was always our boy. And me? I was the one who asked uncomfortable questions, the one who couldn't stay silent when everything inside me was screaming. I grew up in a Soviet-style apartment in the southwest of Moscow, where mornings smelled like buckwheat porridge and evenings like my father's cigarette smoke. I remember sitting in the kitchen, helping Mom peel potatoes as she told me how a proper daughter should live. Obey, don't argue, don't meddle in adults' matters. I nodded even though something inside me shrank. I was 10, maybe 12, and I already knew that being proper meant disappearing. It all started with a card. It was lying on my kitchen table, cream-colored with gold embossing, like a wedding or anniversary invitation. I found it in my mailbox after work on a cold November evening when my fingers were numb even in gloves. Helen, come to a family dinner. It's time to make peace. Tamara. Mom's signature was neat, just like her handwriting in the notebook she checked when I was a kid. Half a year earlier we'd had a fight. I refused to give Adam $50,000 for yet another genius startup. Something about delivering organic groceries no one ordered. He yelled that I was selfish, that I only thought about myself. Mom said, "You've always been like this, Helen. Always against the family." I left, slamming the door. Since then, silence. No calls, no texts, not even the obligatory "How are you?" I stood at the table holding the card, my heart pounding in my throat. For some reason, I remembered the smell of cabbage pies Mom used to bake for holidays, how she'd place them on the table, and all the guests would praise them while I sat in the corner, hoping she'd smile at me. But she never did. I set the card down and sat on the old wooden chair that creaked like my thoughts. Should I go or not? The dinner was in the suburbs, in their new house, which they bought after selling Grandma's apartment. I still remembered Mom saying, "It's for the family, Helen, for our future." But I'd heard rumors that the papers for that apartment weren't clean, that Aunt Sylvia, Mom's sister, was left with nothing. I picked out a dress. Dark blue, simple, bought on clearance at a mall 2 years ago but never worn. Mom always said dresses like that made me look cheap, but I loved it. It was mine, not theirs. I put my hair in a bun, wore an old wool coat that smelled of dust, and headed to the train station. The commuter train to the suburbs rumbled like a tired beast, gray fields and bare trees flashing by outside the window. I stared at my reflection in the glass and thought, maybe this is my chance. Maybe they really want me back. The thought was like an old scratched record, still playing somewhere deep inside me. I knew it could be a trap. Mom loved those staged dinners, like in the old days when everything had to look proper. Guests drinking from crystal glasses, conversations about summer houses and neighborhood gossip. But I still went because somewhere inside that little Helen still lived. The girl who peeled potatoes with Mom, helped Dad fix his old car, sewed Adam a costume for the school play when he forgot until the last night. That Helen still hoped. When the train stopped, I stepped onto the platform. The air smelled of damp leaves. My parents' house stood at the end of the street, big, with white walls and a tiled roof, like something out of a magazine about the good life. I noticed they had replaced the old wooden welcome sign above the porch with a new one that read Family First. The words cut like a knife. I knocked, but the door opened before I could finish. A man in a white shirt and black vest, holding a tablet, asked, "Name?" "Helen," I said. My voice was steady, but inside I was shaking. He checked something on the screen and let me in. The smell of roasted duck and rosemary hit me. Familiar, almost comforting. Until I saw the seating chart on the sideboard. The guests' names were neatly written, but one spot in the corner just said guest. I swallowed the lump in my throat, handed my coat to another stranger. Not Mom, not Dad, not Adam. No one looked at me. No one said, "Helen, you came." I sat in my corner seat, hands folded on my lap, waiting for the awkwardness to fade, but it didn't. Conversations swirled like smoke. About Adam's new car, about someone's son getting into college, about a vacation house that needed winterizing. Not a single word to me. I stared at the table, crystal glasses like in my childhood, Mom's pies, a bottle of cheap champagne Dad always opened with exaggerated pride. Everything looked like before. But I wasn't the same anymore. I sat in the corner where the chandelier's light barely reached. My fingers fiddled with the tablecloth edge as if they could cling to something real. The smell of roast duck and cabbage pies filled the air, heavy like memories. About 30 guests, distant relatives, neighbors from the suburb, a couple of Dad's old co-workers, laughed and clinked glasses. It all looked like the perfect family dinner, just like the ones Mom used to host when I was a kid. Back then I loved those evenings. I helped set the table and felt proud when guests praised Mom's cooking. But now I felt like a stranger, as if I'd been invited by mistake. My place card just said guest, no name, no face. Mom, Tamara Johnson, sat at the head of the table in a cream-colored dress, her hair perfectly styled as always. Her smile was sharp, like the knife she used to carve the duck. Dad, Victor Johnson, sat beside her in a navy sweater, sipping wine and nodding to some guest's story. My brother Adam, in a trendy shirt with the top buttons undone, was joking with his wife Irene, who kept adjusting her gold earrings. No one looked at me. The conversations flowed past me, about Adam's new car bought, as he bragged, for $33,000, about someone's wedding in Miami, about how renovation materials had gotten so expensive. I tried to catch Mom's eyes, but her gaze slid over me like I wasn't even there. I reached for the pitcher of cranberry juice, and then felt the air in the room shift. Everyone's eyes, as if on command, turned to the head of the table. Mom stood up, her chair creaking softly. She picked up her wine glass and tapped it lightly with a fork, once, twice. The sound was sharp like a gunshot. The guests fell silent. Even the clinking of dishes stopped. "Friends," she began. Her voice was warm but carried that metallic edge I knew too well. "Today we gathered to remind ourselves what family truly means." Her gaze swept the room, lingering on Adam, on Dad, on the guests, then on me. "You see, Victor and I always taught our children that family is a duty. It's not just love. It's respect. Respect that must be earned." She paused, her lips curling into a smile, though her eyes stayed cold. "Unfortunately, not everyone understands that. Some daughters forget that family is an honor, not a right." I felt the blood drain from my face. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Someone coughed awkwardly. Adam smirked, leaning back in his chair. Irene stared down at her plate, fiddling with her napkin. Mom continued, her voice quieter now, but each word dropped like a stone. "There are those who think they're better than us, who believe they can put themselves above family, above tradition, above everything we've built over the years. Such people do not deserve a place at this table." I sat frozen, feeling the guests' eyes burning into me. Someone chuckled softly. Someone else looked away. I glanced at Dad, silently begging him to say something to stop this. But he just nodded, as if agreeing with the sentence being passed. And then it happened. Mom stepped toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor. Before I could react, her hand flew up, and the sting of her slap seared my cheek. The room gasped. I heard my wine glass slip from my hand and shatter on the floor. The shards scattered like my thoughts. My cheek burned, but I couldn't move. My vision blurred, but I didn't let the tears fall. Mom stood over me, her hand still trembling, but her eyes held no regret, only triumph. Adam clapped slowly, theatrically, like he was watching a bad play. "Bravo, Mom," he said with a smirk. The guests stayed silent. Some averted their eyes. No one stood up. No one said a word. Dad finally spoke, without lifting his eyes from his glass. "Serves you right, Helen." His voice was so casual, as if he were commenting on the weather. I sat there feeling my world shrink to this single moment of pain. Not just on my cheek but deeper, in the place where I'd still kept a shred of hope that they loved me. I remember being a child. Mom scolding me for the dress I sewed myself because it wasn't proper. Dad saying nothing when I cried because Adam broke my bike, and Mom excused him. "He's a boy, he's allowed." How Adam stole my pocket money and my parents said, "Don't be selfish, Helen. Family shares everything." I had been their shadow, their mistake, their inconvenient truth. Slowly I pushed my chair back. The sound of the wooden legs scraping the floor was the only thing breaking the silence. I placed my napkin on the table, stood up and walked to the door. Not quickly, not dramatically, just left. I passed through the hallway lined with family photos. Photos where my face had long been cut out or covered. Past the old coat I'd bought with my first paycheck, the one Mom called cheap and tacky. Past the mirror I didn't want to see myself in. Outside, the November air hit my face, cold and sharp, like the truth I'd avoided for so long. My cheek still burned, but I didn't touch it. I sat down on the worn wooden steps, damp and smelling of old paint. No one followed me. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not Adam. Not even Irene, who sometimes almost felt like a friend. The silence was louder than their words. I took out my phone. My hands didn't shake, though I thought they would. I looked at the screen at my contact list and realized this wasn't just humiliation. This was the end. Not the end of a family. I'd never truly been part of it. It was the end of the illusion I'd carried inside me, like an old photograph tucked in a wallet. I wasn't their daughter. I was their victim. And in that moment, sitting on those cold steps, I decided I wouldn't be anymore. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped on 3 names: David, Olivia, and Mary. 3 calls I'd never thought I'd make. But now I knew they were my only way out. I breathed in the cold air, smelling of fallen leaves and distant smoke, and tapped the first number. The phone rang, and I felt something inside me click, like a lock finally opening. The cold seeped through to my bones, but it was more honest than the warmth inside that house. My cheek still burned from Mom's slap, but the pain already felt duller, fading into the November night, mixing with the smell of wet leaves and far-off fire. The phone screen glowed in the dark like a beacon. I stared at those 3 names: David, Olivia, Mary. 3 calls I'd postponed for years, because I'd always hoped my family would change. But hope died somewhere between Adam's slow clapping and Dad's smirk. I pressed the first number. David answered after the second ring. His voice was low and steady, grounding me like an anchor. "Helen, what happened?" I inhaled, feeling the cold fill my lungs. "David, it's time. Freeze the trust. Just like we talked about 2 years ago." The silence on the other end was brief but heavy. David, my high school friend, now a lawyer with a small practice downtown, knew more about my family's secrets than I once did. "You're sure?" he asked, not doubting me but giving me one last chance to turn back. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Start." I remembered how 2 years earlier, when Mom was recovering from gallbladder surgery, I'd found an old leather-bound folder hidden behind stacks of tax forms in her office. Inside, documents for the family trust, created with Grandpa's money, bearing my signature. But I had never signed anything. I made copies, photographed every page, feeling like a thief in my own house. David had helped me understand it all. Mom had never revoked the power of attorney she'd given me when she was sick, believing I was the obedient daughter who'd never use it. Dad had been too arrogant to double-check. Back then I hadn't dared act. But now, sitting on those cold steps, I knew. The time had come. The second call was to Olivia. She'd been my accounting mentor since college, now working as an auditor at a major firm in Manhattan. I sent her the photos of those same documents, the ones I'd quietly taken today while the guests were drinking champagne. I slipped into my father's study while he was boasting about Adam's new project. Inside his desk drawer were loosely stacked safe deposit slips, bank statements, and transfer lists. "Olivia," I said when she picked up, Her voice sleepy but concerned. Check these. This is their fund. Adam's been siphoning money through shell companies. I want the full trail. She didn't ask questions, only said, Helen, if this is true, it's criminal. Are you ready? I looked up at the faint stars through the clouds. I'm ready. The third call was to Mary, an old-school journalist whose newspaper people still read in print. She wrote about corruption and family inheritance wars. I sent her a link to a cloud folder containing the same documents and a few recordings I'd made while caring for Mom. On one of them, my father told Adam, Helen won't find out. She's too busy with her accounting. Publish it, I told Mary. But without my name. Let it just be the truth. She replied briefly. Give me 24 hours. I put the phone away and stood up. My legs were stiff, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I walked to the train station without looking back at the house. The carriage smelled of dampness and stranger's perfume. A woman across from me scrolled through her phone, her fingers darting across the screen as if she were searching for something important. I wondered if she was running away from someone too, but I didn't ask. We all carry our stories in silence. By morning it had begun. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. First my father. His voice was like a rusty nail. Helen, what have you done? The accounts are frozen. The bank says you did this. I sat at my small kitchen table, drinking tea from an old mug with a broken handle, and answered calmly. I didn't do anything, Dad. I just showed the truth. He screamed something about ingratitude, but I hung up. Then Adam called, his voice trembling with rage. You think this makes you a hero? You've always been jealous, Helen. Always. I didn't answer. I just put my phone on silent and poured more tea. Mom called last. Her voice was cold as marble. You destroyed the family. Do you realize what you've done? I looked at my reflection in the window. A tired woman with dark circles under her eyes, but standing straight. No, Mom, I said softly. You destroyed it. I just stopped staying silent. She went quiet, then spat out. You were never one of us. And hung up. I sat in my tiny apartment, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. It was old, my grandmother's, with a pendulum that always lagged a bit behind. I remembered Grandpa's words. Truth is like snow, Helen. It falls quietly, but it covers everything. He had died when I was 20, leaving us a country house and some money. Money that, as I later learned, went into Mom's family projects. Back then I didn't ask where it went. I'd been too busy trying to be a good daughter. By noon, Olivia texted me. Helen, you were right. The transfers through Adam's fund were fake contracts. The money went to accounts in Kaliningrad disguised as charity. I'm preparing the report. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. An hour later, David called. The trust is frozen. Your power of attorney is still valid. They didn't even check, Helen. They were too sure you'd never dare. For the first time that day, I smiled. Not out of joy, but because I finally understood. They had never truly seen me. Mary sent the draft article. Scandal in Beverly Hills. Family trust under fraud investigation. I read the first lines and put the phone down. I didn't need to see my name in the headlines. I just needed the truth to come out. I stood by the window and looked out at the neighborhood. Kids were playing in the yard, someone walked a dog, an old woman carried a grocery bag. Life went on simple, ordinary, while something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not brightly. As if I'd finally shrugged off an old coat I hadn't realized was weighing me down. I remembered sitting with Grandpa on the porch of our summer house, listening to him strum an old guitar and hum old songs. Helen, he used to say, don't be afraid to be yourself, even if it hurts. Back then I didn't understand. Now I did. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was simply taking my name back. 2 weeks later, the court date came. I rode the subway to the courthouse, clutching the metal pole as the train swayed through the dark tunnels. David, my lawyer, was waiting outside. His usually calm face was tense, but in his eyes burned the same fire I remembered from school, when he'd defended me from boys who mocked my old sneakers. Helen, we're ready, he said, straightening his tie. The documents, Olivia's report, the recordings, they won't get away with it. I nodded, though my chest tightened, not from fear, but from the realization that I was standing against my own family. The courtroom smelled of old wood and paper dust. I sat beside David, feeling the chill seep under my coat. Across from me, Mom Tamara sat in a strict gray suit, her hair perfect but her lips pressed tight in anger. Dad stared straight ahead, as if I were invisible. Adam sat off to the side, fidgeting with his cuffs, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. I noticed Mom shoot Adam a quick, reproachful glance, as if he'd already failed her. The judge, a woman in her 60s with tired eyes and a stern voice, read out the case. Plaintiff Helen Johnson, seeking to invalidate the family trust and investigate financial fraud. Their lawyer, a polished man in an expensive suit with a luxury watch on his wrist, began with pomp. My client, Tamara Ivanovna, and her family have become the victims of an emotional attack by a daughter who, driven by personal resentment, is trying to destroy their reputation. He spoke of me as if I were an envious and unstable woman who had never accepted my brother's success. But as I listened, I didn't feel anger, only growing clarity. I looked at the judge and said calmly, "I'm not angry. I just want the truth to come out." Dmitri handed the judge a folder with evidence. Forged documents with my signature, records of transfers through Artyom's shell companies, and an audio recording of my father calmly discussing how to hide money from taxes. When the recording played, a heavy silence filled the room. My father's cold, calculating voice echoed through the courtroom. "Lena won't find out. She's too busy with her petty life." My mother lowered her eyes, her fingers clutching her purse. Artyom turned pale, his hands visibly trembling. "Is this your voice, Viktor Pavlovich?" the judge asked, raising an eyebrow. My father opened his mouth but only managed to mutter, "It's not what it sounds like." "That's enough," the judge interrupted. The ruling came quickly. The trust was declared invalid. My grandfather's assets in Pereslavl-Zaleski and the accounts they had tried to move were placed under my control. The case is to be forwarded to the investigative committee for potential fraud charges, the judge added. The sound of the gavel struck like a gunshot. I stood up, calmly gathered my coat, and walked out without looking back. My father shouted something after me, but I didn't turn around. Outside, light snow was falling. Moscow smelled of wet asphalt and gasoline. I breathed in the air. It felt cleaner than everything I had left behind. A few days later, Artyom came to see me. I opened the door and saw him standing there in an old jacket, his eyes red, hair disheveled. He no longer looked like the family's golden boy, just a man who had lost something important. "Lena," he said, standing in the doorway, "I knew they were using you. I knew about the forged signatures, but it was easier for me to stay silent." His voice trembled, and I knew he wasn't lying. For the first time in years, I didn't see my brother as the boy who clapped after my mother's slap, but as a boy who had also been broken. "Forgive yourself, Artyom." "I can't," I answered quietly. He nodded, as if he had expected it, and left. I closed the door, and felt something inside me finally let go. I no longer waited for their love. A week later, I went to my grandfather's house in Pereslavl-Zaleski. The road wound through forests smelling of pine and damp earth. The house stood on a hill, old, with peeling paint and a worn-out porch. Inside, it smelled of dust and birch firewood. I found the old blanket my grandfather and I used to wrap ourselves in when we drank tea and listened to Vysotsky on his ancient record player. I lit the fireplace, and the flames crackled as if greeting me. On the mantel stood a photograph. Me at 10 years old in braids, next to my smiling grandfather holding a fishing rod. He always said, "Lena, build your life, not theirs." I registered a foundation in his honor. I named it Bright Path, simple without pomp. It helped women who, like me, had been betrayed by their families. Financial aid, legal consultations, courses teaching them not to fear their own truth. I worked on it in the evenings after my accounting shifts. And every time I got a letter saying, "Thank you, I'm not alone anymore," I felt as though my grandfather was somewhere nearby, nodding and smiling. One evening, I sat by the fireplace holding his old mug, still smelling faintly of herbal tea. Outside, snow was falling quietly, covering everything, just like my grandfather used to say. I remembered my mother saying, "You were never one of us," my father's silence and Artyom's clapping hands. And I realized their words no longer hurt. That was their truth, not mine. I didn't destroy a family. I built my own, from truth, from the warmth of the fireplace, from my grandfather's memory, and from the women I helped. I stepped out onto the porch, inhaled the cold air smelling of pine and freedom. The stars above Pereslavel shone brightly, as if someone had lit them just for me. I hadn't defeated them. I had set myself free. And that was enough.